Welcome to The Exchange. I'm your host, Rob Cox. Today we're talking about Facebook and its much anticipated IPO. My guest is David Kirkpatrick, author of The Facebook Effect and the founder of the Techonomy Conference. David, thanks for joining me.
Good
so
to be
you
here.
have written
Thanks.
like nobody else about Facebook. Give us like a great big 360-degree pitch into why people should throw aside their conventional valuation mechanisms and metrics and buy this puppy.
I actually don't say buy the stock. I do think it will go up, and I also think that, Facebook is an organization, a company unlike any that's ever existed, and there are plenty of people who believe its potential is massive. And it also, among the 900 million users, are plenty who themselves want to own the stock. So I think there's going to be tons of demand for the foreseeable future. But I cannot justify a 25x revenues valuation any more than anybody else can.
It's quite
that kind
difficult,
of thing is
right?
total guess.
But I think, as you know, one of the points people make, and you probably agree with this, is we can't actually use the sort of historical measures that people have used, even with a Google, to try to extrapolate forward for Facebook's potential.
Well, Google is probably as close as another company has come because they are similarly a quasi-monopoly. Facebook's even more of a monopoly in some ways than Google is. But I don't think the businesses are really analogous, and therefore I don't think you can take Google's metrics historically and say, well, Facebook ought to be able to do the same or better or worse. Really, it's tabula rasa. This is brand new territory. We don't know. Facebook is a completely new kind of beast. It's a communications infrastructure for the planet based on identity that does a lot of things that no company has ever done. I think many of them have the potential to generate tremendous amount of profit and revenue.
Yeah, well, let's
and
talk
wealth,
about that.
But I don't think you can prove it.
Yeah, but how do you do it? Let's just think about it, just sort of theoretically.
Okay.
So you've got 900 million people. They're willingly putting up their information. Now, the revenues are now about $4 billion a year. They've got everyone talks about how they built this network. Now it's time to harvest, to monetize. But how do they do that without actually hurting the experience, I guess?
Well, there's a number. First of all, they have a very good targeting business in advertising today. They have uniquely accurate internet ad targeting.
Yeah.
That's something they have got nailed, okay? They can grow that, and if you talk to advertisers, they're excited about it. I mean, this great story about how the Hunger Games heavily relied on Facebook, did not use traditional advertising on TV and elsewhere the way most movies did, and it became the top movie in America. So there's a lot of that, a lot of upside there. But there are two really big opportunities that haven't even been touched yet. One is to become an ad distribution network, because they have these relationships with millions of websites who tap into their platform in one fashion or another. They could offer those sites the ability to show an ad and get revenue, and Facebook could apply the exact same targeting they apply internally to those externally displayed ads. That could be a massive business, much bigger than DoubleClick was ever.
Right.
That's one complete new opportunity.
So it's just from zero to who knows what.
Could be quite large, though.
What about risks? I mean,
there's another one.
There's a few. Okay, we'll go back to that. But looking in the prospectus, there are a number of risk factors. One that, in fact, just this week, ComScore came out and said that basically smartphone users spend an hour more on Facebook on their smartphones than they do on their computers. As you know, there is in the prospectus this risk that they say we don't yet know how to monetize mobile use. I mean, how concerned should people be about
That's not the kind of risk that I focus in on. I think there's a number of risks that Facebook faces long term, but they have more to do with regulation from governments, which is a really big macro
privacy
risk.
in general?
Privacy is the sort of hot button that sort of draws the attention, and that will be the top. In fact, right now in Europe, there is a law being proposed, the right to be forgotten, that would effectively make Facebook not work.
Right.
Okay, so it's already happening.
Well, this means it would erase your information.
And in China, Facebook is banned. So let's face it, Facebook faces regulatory challenges. Mark would love to be in China.
Right.
But the other big risk, in my opinion, is the complete reliance on the judgment of one individual, who I tremendously admire, who I think has made fantastic decisions up to this point, but I think everyone is fallible, and to have one single point of failure in a company that may be in the hundreds of billions in valuation is a new phenomenon.
Well, he's got 57% of the vote, so there's no question that he controls things, and shareholders or prospective shareholders are going to have to give up all that control to Mark. It's the worry one has is that today's Zuckerberg is tomorrow's Murdoch.
He's not like Murdoch in any way. It's not like that's the kind of way I think of it. It's just that judgment is hard when you're dealing with a fast-changing business that's operating at massive scale globally with all these issues of technology evolution and governmental pressure and changing social behavior. He's got to remain on top of all that in order to make the right judgments for this company's long-term growth. Do I think it's possible that he will? Yes. In fact, I think it's probably more likely than not that he will do a great job and Facebook will get to 2 billion and maybe even larger. And
200,
still,
yeah.
2 billion users.
2 billion users,
yeah.
wow.
And I think that's perfectly possible. But I also think it's possible that, you know, some massive, you know, going into China is the most perilous thing. He wants desperately to go into China. It will alienate his customers and his users around the rest of the world when he does sacrifice, which I think he will, some amount of control to the Chinese government. That is by far the most complicated thing he has on his plate in the near term. But there's going to be other stuff like that.
Now, I mean, if you look at China, I mean, there's sort of Twitter-like services, of course, there. I mean, you think, how would he approach China? Would it be, he would not going to give up people's information willingly to the Chinese?
Well, yes, he will. The reality is nobody runs an internet business in China without giving the government a backdoor entry to it. That's just the way it is.
Isn't the risk then, of course, that it turns off all the rest of the users outside?
That's what I'm saying. Yeah. But I think it might be able to be done, say, oh, you know, that's actually a separate service at first, and then maybe we'll later integrate it, maybe even give it a different name, possibly. Look, Mark, his view is Facebook is for everyone on the planet. That's what he cares about most. That's what he works on every day. China is by far the world's largest internet population, the world's largest country. He's not going to ignore it.
Yeah.
And he would rather, in a way, in my opinion, see Facebook totally fail than not succeed at being available to everyone.
Right. So he's going to make China happen, do or die. What about Instagram? Now, I mean, looking in the States, I mean, it was clear that Mark made this judgment. It was a pretty snap judgment. Famously, like a long weekend. And then he told the board he paid $1 billion of shareholders' money, which is mostly his money. But I mean, the point is, there was some concern that was a sort of panic, that something can be created that does challenge Facebook's dominance in various things like, you know, photo sharing. I mean, how did you read that?
I was surprised that they made the Instagram purchase at that price, because if I were expecting them to make a massive acquisition, I would think it would have more to do with their platform, with the infrastructure they're building that others can use, whereas that was an augmentation of an app, which is by far their most important app.
I mean, it's important.
It's by far the most important. It's the single biggest glue that keeps people from leaving Facebook is their photos. Right. So I think it was not stupid. But, you know, yesterday at the meeting with investors in New York, he said, I'd do it again.
But he did. Yeah, well, he can do it again and again.
He probably will.
He calls the shots. Well, thank you, David. Appreciate you coming on.
Great to be here.
For more on Facebook's rise, check out Breaking View's new book, Facebook, A Like Story. You can order your copy on Amazon, iTunes, and Barnes & Noble. I'm Rob Cox. Join us again next week on The Exchange.